And happy birthday to Zoran Mamdani.
That was great. I think we should get another round of applause. So there's so much that we could talk about, but the thing that I want to start with is that just some context about Rahul Gandhi, which makes this kind of really interesting, is that Rahul Gandhi, although he's been around for a while as the leader of the Congress, doesn't actually talk that much, right? He doesn't spend that much time talking to journalists, filmmakers, he gives speeches and so on. And you got him to talk. So how did you do it?
I mean, so I'm from India. I have an Indian passport. The only thing American about me is my accent. So I had been paying attention to this particular march and that he was doing it, and I found it really interesting. I mean, I'm just curious, how many people knew this happened? Okay. So this was a huge mobilization in the world, and so many people didn't know about it. And I think that, you know, I was definitely intrigued about it and was starting to ask questions. And then I wanted to have access to this footage. And I remember looking at like these 90 pages of logs, and I was like, this is so wild. And then I was told, hey, look, if you're very serious about, you know, doing a film about this, Rahul Gandhi is going to be in DC for meetings next week. And I was like, next week? Okay. And you have 20 minutes. And so, you know, like kind of crash produced the thing. And I remember thinking, okay, we'll do this interview. And to be honest, if I don't believe him, I don't know if I'll make a film. You know, but that, it kind of, because I've been very interested in this particular march and, you know, what it did, and especially what happened with the Indian general election. And so I was, given my 20 minutes, which suddenly actually became an hour and a half. And I think his assistant was like ready to he was like, we have meetings to go to. But I think in the conversation just gave him space to talk, and that I was going to be a listener.
And how did you find him? I mean, you clearly thought he was telling you the truth, but like, what was the demeanor like off camera?
Well, I told Nikhil this little anecdote, but this was for me because I was given such a short time, and I was like, I just have to kind of do a little like, let me try this. I didn't really share this even with my production at all. I was like, I had just torn my ligament a few weeks prior, and so I was like, I don't need to wear my little boot, but I'm gonna do it because if he's really the person he said, we believe him to be, where he's talking to people, and if I'm going to be interviewing him, sitting across from him, and I'm wearing this, he's going to ask me what happened, and how I answer the question will set the tone for how we even engage in this interview. But he asked me what happened, and he was very, he's like, are you doing physical therapy? And I was like, he is the guy. He is, and so I think that also gave us the space to have like a very frank, open, honest conversation, and you don't really see him like this otherwise.
You really don't. How did you get involved, and why did you get involved?
So this is 100% Shruti's film. I just want to be very clear that I had very little to do with the production, or even I watched some cuts. But Shruti was talking about this to me, and I think others in our little community for quite a while, and I thought it was a really brave film to make, and also incredibly relevant to what is happening here today. I think this film is a mirror of what we see happening in the U.S., even down to the anti-Muslim bias and sentiment, and so that was really profound to me. I also think this is an incredible picture of resistance and a way of resistance, and that we have seen implemented here also. And just like India, if the US fails to remain a democracy, the impact, the ripple effect on the world is terrifying, and we are on that downward slide. And I think so this the idea of this going out into the world as sort of a message, a warning, a call to action, also inspiration to people was, again, really important to me. And I, like I said, I watched a couple of cuts. We, so did the rest of my team, and they just felt it was really profound. It really resonated. It's a global story that the world needs to see, because this sort of slide, into authoritarianism is not just here. It's in other places too, as we know. It's a global issue. So this felt like a global story.
I mean, one of the things, because we had really been this super small team working on this for various reasons. And when I was starting to finally just show it to people I trusted, Tanya's here, who'd seen so many cuts with me, and I shared it then with Geeta. And Geeta, you had, this incredible note, because one of the earlier cuts opens in Kashmir, and there's, the security breach, and then it kind of goes back around, and then there had been these attacks, in Kashmir, and then India and Pakistan were kind of, at odds again, and then it felt like, and then Geeta had this incredible note being like, if you start it in Kashmir, it then becomes about Kashmir. And that had just happened in the world. And so then that was a big kind of creative change of like, what is the entry point now into this film gonna be? And so that was, important to also realize that, by the time maybe this movie comes out, India will have 1.6 billion people.
So I think we're going to take some questions, but before we do that, can I just ask one question, which might be slightly strange, but at the end of the movie, the march happened, the elections, the result may not have been everything that the Congress and Rahul Gandhi wanted, but it was still, as everybody said, super significant. Did it leave you optimistic where things are going at the end of it, or are you still, because at the end of the day, it is still, there are all kinds of challenges, right? So are you optimistic at the end of working on this, all the people that you spoke to, all the footage that you saw, so much of it that, we wouldn't have seen that wasn't in this? How do you feel about the state of affairs? This is less a filmmaker question, more like, Shruti, big brain question.
I mean, I think I'm always a bit of an optimist, which is why I even want to make a film like this. I think right now, there's the Bihar state elections going on, which is a very important kind of gauge, but then there's a lot of conversations around election, like racketeering, and it's important to show the corruption that's existing, and why this, current regime is still in power. And so this film is also just to not just also talk about India. I mean, I'm hopeful about India as well, because you're seeing the people who want the change, and the leaders have to represent the people. And I think that this is a film that, to Geeta's point, should talk about the interconnectedness around, with democracies everywhere. And at one point, I thought the reason I want to make this movie is India is a few years ahead of the US. I think that gap has tragically been reduced, but that was also kind of the impetus, was that, you should see it, pay attention, and don't let this happen to you. And I think that, obviously there need to be, movements across the globe in the way that they have been in the past to uphold democracy.
But I also just want to add that there have been other, I feel like this film follows a lot, a sort of line of films that have been coming out of India that are about these issues and the resistance. I just want to shout out Anurima Bhargava, who's executive producer on While We Watched. I mean, that film came out as well, which was an incredible warning and call to action for us in the US about the media and what was happening in India in the media, and sort of the takeover of the media by the state. And then, so there's, and then also before that, Writing with Fire. But there's just so many, there's again, a lot of films coming out of India that I think speak to the global crisis that we're in, and this slide, and this feels like it's, again, just, in that line of important films that we need to, that again, if the world sees this, they will relate, you know, just like the films that came before, so.
That is optimistic. Well, should we get some questions? Anyone?
Yes, I have a question. Great film should be made. And, you know, I'm wondering about your plans. I know that this is the first time everyone's seeing it, but I'm really curious about what you're maybe fundraising for the film or talking to people about the film here in the States. You know, there's a huge percentage of Indian Americans that adore Modi, and when you bring up the anti-Muslim stuff, they're like, you know, that's not really that deal, the economic, you know, the story. So I'm wondering if you can talk to us about that, and then it's actually two questions. The second question is, can you tell us when Rahul Gandhi would get to a place, what would he do if they're at a rally, if they're listening, like give us a little bit more of that flavor.
So, the first question is a good one. You know, it feels so special to do this at Woodstock, which feels like a really wonderful community, especially for this type of film, for it to be seen. I mean, my family was already audited because of my social media opinions, and my parents and brother live in Delhi. So I've already gotten my warning, let's say. But that's why I think, especially for the first, this really felt right, and we'll be in competition at Doc NYC next. And then, thank you. And, you know, and I think we have to really figure out the strategic partners and ways to engage with this. And I feel like I've been in a bit of a hole that now even you know, I'm like, you know, we have to start planning, you know, I mean, I've been talking to people because I do a lot of work, you know, on Signal threads, and it's like, what are you gonna do in New York when, like, you know, this gets around and you're gonna have like the swath of like right-wingers who are gonna come and disrupt the screening, and that could be a reality of it that I have to be prepared for. But the good news I would like to believe is that there are people who do want that change. They feel siloed, they don't necessarily know that there's other people who have that perspective. Of course, I look at, and I'm very partial because I've known him since he was 12, but Zoran's campaign and work is really incredible to show that change as well, you know, from going from like a 1% chance to, you know, hopefully we'll have some good news in the next few weeks. But I don't see this movie ever going on any major platform because India is too big and important for their business, for these tech companies that are distribution platforms for entertainment, that they do not want to rock the boat there. So all the more reason to make sure that how it gets seen, the grassroots work, the, you know, where it lands next will be very crucial to not letting the film and conversation suffer or be silenced. I can't tell you the number of friends who are filmmakers or comedians or artists who are working in India who can get paid a lot of money and then their shows get canceled and they get paid for the year and they're silenced. You know, and that happens. And so I think it's going to be important, especially after going through this effort and, you know, like, you know, collaborating with Dean Bunder, who had like worked on, you know, documenting all of this. Like, it's important for this incredible work to get seen in the right way. Your second question, what would Rahul Gandhi do? It also depended on where they were stationed. If it was like a smaller place, or if it was in a capital, you know, or like in the capital of the state, or so on, and what the best route would be by foot, as well, especially from the march from south to north was done completely by foot. And you know, they had these containers where they would stay at night, and depending on, you know, where they were, you know, one day it could be a press conference or a convening with communities, or they just had to cover ground. So I think it really ranged.
This is a really basic question. They seem to be walking so fast. How do they do that? I march, you march slowly. How do they get so quick?
I mean, I think it was the aspect of just like covering ground. But of course he would stop as well and have like moments where he needed to connect with the community and community leaders or people in villages as well. But you know, he walked 4,000 kilometers in 141 days and then had to continue working as like the leader of the opposition too. I don't think he would spend like 1 year doing that, but he spent, you know, half that time.
It's an extraordinary feat.
Did you have a question?
I'm curious what his security looked like. Like, obviously, he would be a target, and to open himself up to hugs and holding hands and everything, how did he balance that with making sure that he, or to the best extent he could, wasn't going to be attacked?
I mean, also knowing that his father and grandmother were both killed. But I think he had to kind of lead without, or walk without that fear. And of course, his team was kind of constantly tracking as best as they could. The real security lapse happened in Kashmir, which is when it could have stopped. But he was like, I'm still gonna do it. We just have to get this sorted. But as best as they can, you know, they can try. But I think people were so stunned to look out their window and see Rahul Gandhi walking by. Like no one was like ready for that, you know, and they could go out. I think it's, you know, in terms of what the route was going to be or whatever, like people could have a sense, but he made it.
Can you talk about the process of filmmaking in constant motion and how long you were with him on that journey?
I mean, with Deen Bandar, they were embedded with him the whole time. And, you know, I think, I mean, when I was reading and looking through the footage and watching, you know, the social media cuts that they had made, they were there with him. And I think what was also important to the storytelling, at least for me, was to look at stuff that wasn't also filmed there, like, you know, at that time, like finding the quiet moments with him and his mother as well, when they're looking through these albums, or, thank you, we have 5 minutes. But you know, the thing that I was also kind of confronted with is you can't tell the story of a movement without having context. And so to build a context, it was important to do these interviews and to, you know, kind of give people a sense of the history of India from independence to now, which is like no small task. And so for me, it was just a matter of like really trying to wrap my head around, I can have this like linear march, but we're gonna have to go into like the who is Rahul Gandhi, what is that footage, what is, you know, the history of India from independence to now. So that was also something I was trying to wrap my head around. Shruti. Shruti also has a movie at the festival called Zari, and you should go see it.
So I'm curious, what's happening with Rahul Gandhi right now? If you can give it a sense, and like, is there any world in which this movie will be screened in India? Does he have any sway? Can we show it in certain settings or with certain audiences? Like, what's the vibe there?
I mean, people in India know the march happened for the most part. You know, in their, but I don't think they necessarily have like this, you know, international perspective, you know, in terms of people who are tracking it or care about Indian democracy. So, I mean, it would be great for it to be seen there, but that will be like a kind of secondary thing. Like this is really, you know, at least focusing at this moment on this audience and conversation, where the challenge that, you know, the question that I was asking also is like, why should Indian democracy also matter to the world? And we care about American democracy, even if we're not American. Why shouldn't the world's largest democracy matter? And how can we also make sure to protect that? So I would, you know, it's definitely gonna start internationally first and then eventually make its way to India in a way that also can be screened safely. I think safety is gonna be the big conversation about how it's presented there. Tanya?
The Indian diaspora in America is a huge force and becoming more so. What are your plans to reach
Well, we definitely have to work with, I would say, organize conversations, grassroots screenings, and map out that plan. And that's something that I have to work with the team to navigate. And there's incredible people here that I know I can tap into as a resource for it. I mean, at the same time, to Samia's point, the Indian diaspora is also really tragically embarrassing. Kash Patel, Usha Vance, I can name all of them. And not just on one hand. That's the sad part. And all the more reason for, I think, the other perspective to kind of gather and organize around. And there are people who are doing that work. Oh, was that 5 minutes or that was a question?
No, it's a question.
Oh, you had a question. I thought you were telling me I had 5 minutes. Okay, you can ask. You can ask in the back and then Anu.
Yeah, so anyway, wonderful film. Thank you. It was amazing. It was really great to see. I just had a question. Israel is a democracy in the middle of the world that doesn't have democracies around it. And its movement to support and bring democracy, forward and not backward has been ongoing for years. The demonstrations every Saturday that everybody goes to. How do you see the parallels here with that fight for democracy in a very diverse society?
Yep. I think what's been incredible in Israel have been all the people who have been marching against what has been happening under the Netanyahu regime, and that's been really important and necessary. And you see that at No Kings is happening today. You're seeing that in Israel. You see that also in Hungary. You see that in Brazil. You're seeing that in India. So I think it is important, if it's truly democratic, if a place is truly democratic, then people-led movements can change and topple fascist, authoritarian regimes in a way that's necessary to represent that perspective. And, I will say, I grew up in the Middle East. I'm from India. I grew up in Oman, which is a sovereign, you can call it a benevolent sultanate, where even though it wasn't necessarily democratic, and I will definitely say that there was an issue when it came to, let's say, freedom of speech, you're even seeing freedom of speech being challenged in democracies. So I think it's important to also just show how, we should always fight for democracy no matter where we come from. And I think, and I laud the people in Israel and Palestine who are saying, we're not okay with this and we need to have this change happen. And so, and thank you for your question. But that's the point of this film, is the interconnectedness, not just of democracies, but also fascist regimes. And we have to hold all of those people to account.
Anurima.
Shruti, one of the things that struck me was his comments about listening and all the perspectives that he heard along the way. And I wondered if you got a sense of not only critiques of Modi get silenced and so many communities get silenced, but these voices around the country. What are the things that they were raising? There's some parts of that in the film, but what are the other kind of things that were heard on the march that are being silenced in India outside of the critiques of the government?
I think the thing that Rahul Gandhi also brings up is, a lot of people will focus on the anti-Muslim conversation, but the conversation around the Dalit, lower caste, Adivasi, tribal communities, and the brutal violence that they encounter is an important thing to, recognize, because, and I would say that is a conversation that is obviously kind of put aside more. India has is the second largest Muslim population in the world, right? So it feels like, okay, we can focus on, that conversation. But there's a very real conversation around we can get into the treatment of women and girls, but not even women and girls. I think we have a very violent culture that is built on caste and power. And that has to be something to really understand and completely destroy. And we don't talk about the need to, I think, come at caste in a way, but I think that's important. And I want that to be a bigger conversation and a bigger space where Rahul Gandhi, who obviously, I mean, if there's a Nepo baby in politics, he's the ultimate one, It's like, but for him to also realize that, he comes from his family are Kashmiri Pandits. They're incredibly privileged from where they come from in Kashmir. And so to kind of go and listen to everybody else and also recognize that each person, as he says, we have the same values, I left the floor to him to just talk. It was never like a prompted thing, but I think that's where more listening should happen and where more focus can go. Because we can say caste no bar, it's still there, and it's still a problem, and you even see it in the diaspora here. And so I want that to be a bigger conversation to break.
No, that was 100%. I think the issues of, again, and the reflection everywhere you go. You think about anti-blackness in our culture here, anti-blackness in India, but it's like there are these parallels that are undeniable. And casteism 100% exists here. We carry it with us, unfortunately, wherever we go. The Indian diaspora is huge, but we carry it with us. So agreed, it's something that has to be discussed and dismantled.
Sonia.
Thank you so much for your courage to bring this into our awareness. It's just struck me while I'm sitting here, about a person who thinks that'll never happen to me. So much food, and in particular, this was very concerning for me to see. I wanted to ask a question when you said that you were audited and documented. What is that experience? This is what's coming down the pipe.
It's happening here already.
It's happening here.
The anti-Antifa movement in Congress.
Thank you. And it's a sincere question. When you said your family was audited, what does that mean?
I mean, it's funny because I've been told by friends of my parents who work in were former diplomats, saying you got to tell Shruti to take it down a little bit with all her opinions on social media. And so of course they send that message, I don't listen. And then I was like, I just randomly was coming to India to surprise my father some years ago on his 70th birthday. And I walked they lived in the Middle East for 33 years and moved back to Delhi some years after. And I walked in, excited to surprise my dad, and he's so meticulous, but he was surrounded by a bunch of papers. And he's an accountant. And I was like, that's interesting. I was like, surprise, Dad. And I was like, what's going on? He's like, I got this very weird notice about a bank account from 40 years prior. They're always trying to find something. But because he's an accountant and he knows where everything is and he pays his taxes in India, which says a lot, they couldn't get us, let's say. And so, but I have an Indian passport, so I have the benefit of getting to make a film like this, and I get to go to India. I have friends we have friends who are journalists who, can't get, their OCI cards, they're overseas citizens of India, which, would give them allowance, or access to go back. Those have been denied. Visas are being denied. And so that is a very real thing. And so I think I have a privilege of having an Indian passport while living abroad so I can make this film. But also everyone who agreed to participate in this movie. I can't tell you the number of people I also went to try and interview who felt like they couldn't be a part of this film because it was going to affect them going back to India. So everyone who participated did that knowing that they may not be able to go back.
Can I just say something? one of the greatest things about this when Shruti first showed it to me was how it's almost how the message, the other message, whether it's Rahul Gandhi, whether it's any other alternative, how that's been suppressed and how hard it is to get it out. And one of the things that the march did, and now your film is doing, is communicating that, right? Which worked in the election. When the election results were mentioned in the film, one of the mind-blowing facts is that in 2014, when Modi was elected, the biggest state in the country, which is Uttar Pradesh, which is 160 million people, roughly, 160 to 180, they voted overwhelmingly, 8 out of 10 for Modi. In the previous general election, when everybody was told by the media that everything was in Modi's favor, that same population voted 4 out of 10 for Modi, right? And that's why there was a question whether they'd be able to form a government. And it's a silent sort of movement, and any effort, and particularly an effort like this, to get that message out is like hugely important. And and the benefits, it's very hard to predict what will happen and how it will play out, but we've already seen that happen. And so the more we do it, the more it works and the more things change.
And I will also highlight Nikhil's work, where prior to time you were the CNN bureau chief in India and covering South Asia, so you know that climate well.
But they are. We were driving up here today, so it's very important that this is getting out. But it's also important because one of the things that this film does is that it shows that there is this other movement that has a message, that is competent, that it can get its act together. Because one of the critical pillars of the Modi propaganda have been to paint Rahul Gandhi as essentially a clown, right? So the BJP and the Modi people go around the country and they refer to Rahul Gandhi not as Rahul Gandhi, they call him Pappu, which is just, which is like a clown-like figure. And well, there you go, yeah. And that's what this film partly also is a counter against. And that's very critical because one of the ways, just talking about India, is that there is real intimidation and there's real violence by various arms of the state at the federal level and at the state level, where, by the way, some of the governments are Congress, right? But what is interesting about the Modi government is that they are not actually quite often as competent as they make themselves out to be, right? So, and that's also very important. And they make the other side to be completely incompetent, and they make themselves out to be genius. And we'll go to another question, but to your thing about being audited, the Pulwama, when Rahul Gandhi, the movie, goes to Srinagar, and he goes to the Pulwama martyrs thing. Pulwama was the site of a big bombing in 2019, the beginning of 2019. 2019 was the last general election before this one. Yeah, 2019? Yeah. And he won that election with a supermajority again, in large part because of what happened with that bombing. Blamed it on Muslims, on Pakistan, all this kind of stuff. Journalists were stopped from going, which is routine for Indian media, but this time around they applied it to foreign media, right? I was about to leave the country, so I just thought, screw it. So me and one of my cameramen went up, and we got in, right? And the way we got in is, we just flew in, we just got on a commercial flight, whatever. We come back to Delhi, we air on CNN and so on, and I get called into the foreign ministry to basically get told off, right? One of the things that Shruti and I have in common is that both of us still have Indian passports, which this super competent Indian government didn't realize I had. So I was sitting there whilst I was being told that I'd be deported. I listened to it for like 10 minutes, and I was like, well, to where? Like I'm Indian, I'm not American, I'm not British. And so they're not actually that competent. And the other side is. And, it's great to see something that showcases that.
Should we take a last question and then...
We need a YATRA here. Who's gonna lead it? I'm ready to watch.
Shruti.
Oh, not me.
really lovely, and I didn't know anything about this, but it made me think about, especially when you mentioned women and girls, that sometimes it feels, you see all these people fighting for something wonderful, and it's like, look, we have this huge population of people who do want love and kindness and peace and unity and democracy. Why are we fighting for a seat at this table that doesn't want us? Like, why? Because it just seems sometimes it's like, look, we have enough to go over here and run something parallel. And when you talked about taxes, it's like, what if we all stopped paying our taxes and we're like, well, screw you guys, we're gonna come over here where people do respect women and people do respect people who belong to different castes, because screw that idea. And anyway, it was really lovely because I'm having these feelings, but do you ever feel that way, that sometimes it's like, I'm fighting against something for so long, this government that doesn't want to allow me in? Would it be, should I take all this energy over here and build something else?
I mean, in the UK, they started a new party, you know, so I think in some cases it can work for sure. And I think it also depends on how the systems are at play as well. And you can never, I think, in spite of it all, like, ever lose your sense of hope, even though hope and just, you know, will be moving towards despair. And I think when you feel like you're not alone in that sentiment, and that's why, you know, to be a part of a march, like all the Indians who, you know, are, you know, like the farmers, for example, like there was a huge movement for the farmers' protests, right, that happened some years ago. And you're seeing them, you know, you have like an increase in suicide rates, they can't afford to even just like survive. In the same way, like cut to over here, you had like taxi workers who were also, you know, in New York in particular, because their medallion, like loan repayment, it was just unaffordable for them, and they were kind of really going into that despair. And then you had people who were like, we're not doing this anymore, we're gonna hunger strike for you, we're gonna show up for you. And so I think you can definitely, I believe people-led movements should change the democratically elected people and remind them why they were there in the first place.
They don't own the country. We, the people own the country.
The billionaires own the country. I mean,
Yeah,
like,
those billionaires.
Because, like, I agree with you, but it's just like, it's like at the very top are people who have everything. And unless three spirits visit them in the middle of the night, like in A Christmas Carol, you know, it's just like, well, then fine, you stay over there with your money, and we'll go over here, and we'll do this other thing.
I just want to say that the black community in this country, since they were African American community, since they were literally like kidnapped and trafficked here and enslaved, that's always existed. There's been essentially they, again, living under terrible Jim Crow laws, etc., built their own communities with their own economies and their own sort of systems. But the problem is that when there is, you know, there were like, again, black cities and towns and communities that were in sort of functioning somewhat independently, right, of the larger powers that be that would oppress them. But I think the issue becomes, though, if you are still under this overarching regime, at some point, if you will draw their attention, and at some point they will come in to try to destroy what you have built. So I think that is the issue. It's like the question of working outside the system. Who, if you are particularly a person of color in this country, or even in places like India, right? Like where if you are the person who has been the outsider, if you grow too big, still under the overarching umbrella of whatever, you know, the sort of the government that exists there, once they get their eye on you, you know, then it becomes dangerous for you. So I think this is the thing that that we see again and again, you know, here, and I think in places like that. So that's why it's really about, like, it would be nice to build something over here, but there was Rosewood, there was Tulsa, like black communities, right, that did that. What happened to them? So I think that's the thing, it has to be changed from the top down. you know, particularly for us, you know, and in India, it's the same issue. If an Adivasi community goes off to the side and tries to build their own thing eventually, you know, when they become too large. So I think there's a question, we have to, it has to be, the entire system has to be changed.
And you should also all watch Geetha's incredible movie, The Perfect Neighbor, on Netflix.
Thank you. Thank you for the show.
We should go to No Kings.
And we should go to No Kings. Thank you all for being here and for watching this and being such an incredible audience.